Good afternoon. Not legal advice, of course. Like, subscribe, share, comment. If you have any topics you want me to address, please ask. I may not do it, but if I can, I will. If I can do it in a reasonable fashion. Today, I wanted to talk because it's been in the news. I wanted to talk a little bit about Robinhood um, and kind of what I think of them. And of course, before I start talking about them, because of what they are, I got to spray a little cologne. Got to change the aroma because I'm not a big fan of Robinhood. But before before that, before I address Robinhood, I didn't really understand that orthopedic shoes would really work. But now I stand corrected. So I hope you enjoyed that. So I'm familiar with Robinhood. I was familiar with Robinhood when they did the IPO. I know that because crypto was very hot at that time, and so there was thoughts they would do really well, and I think their principals did very well. In terms of the IPO, I think they did made a lot of money. Um, but at some point in time, even though I personally did not use the app, but I know it's popular for a lot of people. And then I became aware of the issues that arose involving GameStop and et cetera. And I guess the ultimate issue was that there were restrictions on your ability to transact in those. I think there was 13 of them, 13 described quote unquote meme stocks. And so that limited shareholders' ability to make the most amount of money out of those particular securities. And obviously, I think this was 2021, 2020, excuse me, 2020, um, running into 2021. And then those moments pass and people can't make money. So eventually there was a class action filed, I believe, in Miami, Florida, in the district court. It basically alleged that Robinhood had engaged in improper practices by restricting their customers from being able to uh, conduct trades. Their defense was, or in effect, their defense was they were permitted to do that. So Robinhood, in essence, said that they could do that. And they pointed to, unfortunately, the contract, so your customer agreement. So if you're a customer of Robinhood, you may have signed an agreement. There may be other institutions that have similar agreements. So you, of course, should check your own agreements. But in effect, stuck in there in that agreement somewhere buried, of course, because they wouldn't want to be transparent, was a provision that basically said Robinhood at any point in time can decide to not permit you to execute any transaction for any reason. And that's tucked away within the agreement. So when the class action, so that's pretty damning in part. So when the class action went forward or attempted to go forward in Florida in district court, and often that might take a year or two anyway to get kind of to the point where a class is certified and a class action can go forward. But uh, there must have been a motion to dismiss filed in the federal court, and the court granted it. In other words, dismissed the class action. And in effect, the court said, because of this contract provision where it says they can elect not to let you do business if they so choose, then they had every right to do that. And in essence, it may suck, but sorry. They also said, and they kind of skimmed by this, that there was no particular other, either a federal statute or maybe a particular state statute that applied. Maybe in Florida at that time there was not. So then that matter went up to the Court of Appeal in, I think it was in the 11th Circuit in Atlanta, in front of a three-judge tribunal. So that first case was heard, I believe, in 2022, early 2022. The appeal was just decided very recently in the past few days. A three-judge panel agreed with the district court dismissing the class action, again, focusing on the fact that there was a contract that specifically said that Robinhood could do whatever they wanted in terms of denying you the right to execute a transaction. So the moral of the story is, and it may go up, so it may be appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, but an appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court is purely discretionary to the U.S. Supreme Court. They handle just a, a limited number of cases each term, maybe a couple hundred to a few hundred each term. So it would have to be special for them to take it up. They may not just want to take up this case. So if that's the situation, then the class action would be dismissed. There might be other actions that might be able to be brought, but there would be a statute of limitations issue, and whoever might be in the position should obviously check on that. So that's part of it. The other part that I wanted to address was contrary to that, and this is kind of usually something that we don't focus on, is that there was a truck driver named, I think, Juan Batista, who went to arbitration against Robinhood on the same claims. So the class action is proceeding, but before the class action was dismissed, Mr. Batista, who was a truck driver, I think a 27-year-old truck driver, he went to arbitration against Robinhood. Basically the same claims as it was made in the class action. And he was successful. So he got an award against Robinhood for, I think, somewhere in the order of $30,000, which covered his losses, interest, and Robinhood had to pay all the fees associated with the arbitration. And that award was entered into the beginning of 2022. So not legal advice, of course, but if you happen to be a Robinhood investor and your statute of limitations hasn't run and you're somewhere and you think you got screwed, well, you could cite to this case, or you could point out to this case, or you could have counsel point out to the case. Again, it's called Batista versus Robinhood, and it would be in FINRA. So it would be available. And I think it was decided early 2022. And obviously, it involved Robinhood and the specific situation about the restrictions on trading. And obviously, the consumer won. So perhaps there's alternatives for remedies other than those class actions. You probably would need counsel, and they had counsel on this. We probably took it on a contingency basis. So there's probably no upfront fee, and all the costs were picked up by Robinhood. So it may not have been a great resolution, but it was much better than the dismissed class action. So something to consider, and if you're in Robinhood's position, you should quickly get counsel on that. But separate and apart from what I was stating there was the provision in the contract. So if you're at a brokerage and your brokerage has a provision that basically says if they don't want to execute your transaction and you find out that they enforce that provision, so you've seen in the past, for whatever reason, they have decided to go after people and not let them conduct business in terms of executing trades, then you should consider that about leaving your business there. Not financial or not legal advice. But if it were me, if I had an account at Robinhood and I found out that they would actually and have actually stopped me from executing trades because they decided to, if I had an account there, I would no longer have an account there. And for any other institutions or other brokerages that have similar provisions, and you just should ask. So you should call up your brokerage and ask if that's within your contract. And if you find out that they have a history of exercising that provision, you should consider, not legal advice, not financial advice, but I would consider moving my account to another institution that either doesn't have that provision in the customer agreement or doesn't have a history of enforcing it, one or the other. You may not have the ability to completely avoid the provision, but you may have the ability to avoid any institution that's going to enforce that provision. So again, Robinhood, I think they're scumbags. They really screwed over their own retail investors. They have no shame in it. They have it in their contract. They made millions of dollars. And just to kind of let you know that despite, I guess, them winning that appeal, they've incurred somewhere in the order of $175 million in fines to date since they've been around. So there may be a question as to how they conduct business, but they certainly aren't, at least in my opinion, they certainly aren't ethical. They aren't moral. They really did screw consumers, just as provision alone screws consumers and is unfair and one-sided. So again, the greater story here is to check your investor agreement. Make sure your broker can't just decide not to do business with you if it so suits their interests on a particular trade, because it may be against your financial interests. And if you find out that there's a provision whereby your broker can just decide not to execute your trades for any reason, then you really should consider whether you want to be with that brokerage. You may want to, but you should at least consider that. Anyway, hope that helps. Hope that brings you up to speed. So that's the current position of Robinhood. Appellate court sided with Robinhood in their right to screw over their investors. And the only potential remedy that might be available is the U.S. Supreme Court. But I don't think, although, you never know, but I would be surprised if the U.S. Supreme Court took this case, but they could, but I'd be surprised. Anyway, hope that helps. Hope that provides some clarity. Have a great weekend. I will see you, by the way, Sunday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern with JR, little tiny JR, and we'll talk about his recent trial and that his release and his ankle bracelet. We'll talk then.